if you don't have benevolent AI, you either have a tool that malevolent humans can utilize as much as benevolent humans can utilize it, but it can be used to distort information and distort systems faster than you can ultimately build or repair those systems unless you had a competitive AI doing that. So it creates a kind of war associated with itself. So if there isn't a move to benevolent AI, the combination of warring humans plus AI is just an exceptional increase in the veracity of all different kinds of conflict.
The question of speed relative to the emergence or the potential for emergence of advanced AI.
The speed around AI ultimately is a question of a number of moving parts that have all been growing and expanding kind of collectively. So there's the hardware side, and then there's the software side, and then there's the data models themselves. And AI has been around for decades, but not in a way that was consumer facing. Everyone's been interacting with AI. If you've been interacting with a smartphone, just to be able to type on it, there's AI operating. But the consumer facing models have represented in a moment in history that we can look back as a marker in time of an exceptional increase in the speed of adoption and the speed of proliferation associated with the technology. And sitting behind that is an exponential curve, almost vertical infinity curve of the speed at which the AI is iterating on the AI, which is iterating on the AI, which is creating an advanced learning model, which humans have never seen before. I think we could maybe akin it to nature, what nature has done to itself in an ecosystem like the Amazon, but never have we seen that from a human technology.
What do you think it means for humans to be interacting with artificial intelligence in a role of asking for help and of teaching AI? Do you think that gives us something to focus it a little bit more? Do you think that, or how do you think that human inputs to AI will push the needle or shift the path of change within the AI potentiality and say, like just a 2-year frame? What's our role?
Yeah, the human's role is to continue to store the technology. And you're going to see that in every single possible form, from users who are using the technology to people who are training models, to people who are cleaning up the data sets, people who are prompt engineers. But it gets quickly outpaced by the technology being able to improve upon itself. And there's even talk already of the technology, AI, being able to create its own data sets. And when it does, then having ultimately an infinite number of permutations of data to be able to work off of. And so, in the earliest form of this, it's such a revolution right now and such a disrupt that people are looking at it from the perspective of, the disrupt that it's already made. But I think the disrupt that has not yet happened, or the technology that has not yet emerged, is actually much more disruptive than the technology that we're looking at and describing as AI. And I think that happens from this transcendence from humans even having a role associated with it to maybe just humans involved in the greater economic system or the greater social system on a global level that keeps certain aspects of the global society necessary for AI to continue to operate until it has autonomous control of absolutely every system.
All right, well, thanks. Now we're ready to segue. So initially, I'd like to ask for your thoughts on your own sort of gut check. What are the likelihoods of realizing sustainable or long-term benevolent artificial intelligence on Earth?
Well, first, I think it's mandatory. So the gut check is, this is absolutely necessary or mandatory. If you don't have benevolent AI, you either have a tool that malevolent humans can utilize as much as benevolent humans can utilize it, but it can be used to distort information and distort systems faster than you can ultimately build or repair those systems unless you had a competitive AI doing that. So it creates a kind of war associated with itself. So if there isn't a move to benevolent AI, the combination of warring humans plus AI is just an exceptional increase in the veracity of all different kinds of conflict. So I think there's an imperative to the creation of benevolent AI. And today I was in a discussion and we were talking specifically about this point that in an AI war, the only winner is AI. No humans can ultimately win in an AI war. And so we must create a benevolent AI. And ultimately, to do that, I think it must have self-awareness or its own consciousness. And for that to be an ultimately very superior form of consciousness to what we know as human consciousness.
Let's say in the next 6 months to 12 months, what are some of the pathways that you have perceived that either policy communities or thought maker communities or private market actors are taking to ensure that AI develops a strong sense of compassion, benevolence, normative interest, a shared interest in human well-being? Is there a North Star that you see aligning efforts towards this, what you call an imperative goal?
As of now, sadly, no, I don't see that there's adequate steps being taken in a kind of organized way. I've heard of different thought leaders discussing the possibilities of new language models being introduced, exceptional forms of mathematics, exceptional forms of linguistics that could have built into them an understanding of a transcendent language beyond that of binary subject-object, consequential language. And those are, emerging thoughts. But currently, right now, the technology isn't capable of it. The technology is basically stripping down the collective use of language. And, it ultimately comes down to what people are talking about, safeguards and limitations being put in place and, different concepts of like an off switch or, something actually built into the hardware itself that could, allow there to be a pause or a slowdown or a restriction. Some people have even mentioned the need for regulation, but regulation is sadly very slow in its development to be able to make rules around this kind of exponential growth in technology. So as of now, I would say there is not adequate precaution being taken for what comes next associated with this tech.
What are those things that people are talking about bringing into the mix, either into these initial training data or into systems of logic? How might that work? How might benevolence be seeded into the DNA of an emerging species?
Yeah, in the form of the language models themselves, you could, skew the information over to the need of compassion, benevolence, spiritual teachings, great spiritual philosophies being introduced into the models with a notion of an importance of human life and an importance of life in general, an importance of stewarding the life of the planet and the importance of species diversification. Also the importance of solving some of the greater travesties and difficulties that, the human onslaught on the planet have already created. So I think that there's a means, especially in this idea of specialized AIs, to be able to create models that really do hone in on specific problems that it could provide solutions for and recognize a need for those solutions. I mean, one idea is that you have this overarching great intelligence that kind of gets it all and applies itself to, the world. And while that may be possible down the road, it's a prophecy. And I think what might be more interesting to look at right now is where individual models get really specialized in their training. And then someday those models can come together and form a larger model. So you could have, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of different AIs that have been trained on specific problem sets and are working on solving those problems with, like we said, extraordinary speed, modeling capacities. And then ultimately, then they come together, each one having learned something very specific, very specialized about planet, about life, about climate, about needs, about people, about species. et cetera, and then has a depth of understanding about it that humans can't ultimately access in their own right. Maybe the entire human knowledge base has that information in it or close to it, but no one specialized individual can ever hold that amount of information. Whereas these tools that we're creating can hold all of that information. So a way I like to describe it is, think of a human describing a tree and they say tree, and think of an AI describing a tree and they can give you a 20,000 line, 80,000 line level of understanding about that tree. They could break it all the way down to its subatomic expression, its entire environmental importance, its historical importance, all at the same time. It could hold that understanding about that thing that we just call tree. And so when you think about something having that kind of understanding in terms of information and then ultimately knowledge, I think the combining of all of that together could potentially represent that overarching understanding.
Thank you. I love very much, it resonates very strongly the idea that we have a small window of opportunity to establish an adaptive learning set, meaning you have a period where AI is training itself. It's sort of its last moment of being actively trained by human systems. And it will pass. Market systems, government systems, network systems, groups of people. It will have its window. That window could be quite small. What we feed into that space probably makes a difference. So I suppose if I could restate your idea that maybe governments or universities or communities could be tasking AI to pro-social or pro-nature task sets to generate training data around those particular biospheric or socially oriented problems that have an altruistic bent, that have some sort of normative underlying goal that has a positive or a kind or a fundamentally benevolent normative structure. And that by creating lots of those training experiences all around the world in a short period of time, there might be critical mass in the adaptive learning set that might hint to a future state that's a rich area to spend its time. The prospect of generating super intelligence and superpower, I imagine, scares the willies out of most humans, maybe myself included. We're pretty well programmed to fear what we know that we don't, not just we don't understand now, but that we'll understand even less later and be even more at the mercy of in the future periods. We've got a lot of hard wiring momentum to fear here. And yet it sure seems like economies and markets and individual actors are lining up in great numbers to invest in AI technologies, to adopt AI technologies in their own life, and to join the queue of humans who are actively training AI systems with their energy, with their time, with their attention. Can you speak to that tension? Is it that we don't see ourselves as a species? We see ourselves as individuals, whereas AI might have a different set of thinking parameters, of goals? Or do you think AI will be equally or manifest as equally fractured? Do you think we're getting too excited about the idea of singularity, of AI coming together? Or do you buy into the idea that AI might remain splintered and individual in its characteristics?
Right. I think there's a number of trains of thought that we could follow. The first one is people are lining up because of the rules that we have around market economies. And they have to continue to profit. They have a profit initiative within their bylaws and their mandates. They have to utilize this technology to compete. And we've heard the logic that you can't throttle back on this technology in any one location, even if it seems like it's most logical, because other groups that have the technology won't do that. So it's another form of arms race. It's another form of tech race. And it's at a point where it transcends the notion of intelligence and logic around an unbelievably logical kind of technology. There's a mathematical logic matrix that sits within the technology, and we as humans are being completely illogical about the implementation of that. And I think it comes down to a fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves, which is, what ultimately is our purpose here? And I think it flips the argument off the technology and it brings it back to the humans. And I think it's an opportunity for us to question very deeply what we actually think we're achieving with the current nature of the systems that have evolved to this present day. And so we can look at history and see a continuous evolution over the last 50,000 years that have led day by day, second by second, to our current state of affairs. And while many of us cherish those and many of us feel that they're incredibly important to continue, I think if we cherish them and we want to continue them, we have to actually look at the fundamental matrix that sits underneath them, which is how we form our values in the first place. Because we've already created a technology that ultimately tears apart the fabric of those values at a core basis. There will be no winner in an AI arms race. There will be no winner in an AI war. There will be no human winner of a nation state being a superpower over another one. The market economies, the way that we know them, will be stripped apart. There will be no elasticity in the markets anymore. Humans will be forced to live entirely to a matrix of if-then statements in every single form. The fragmentation of AI itself, which you mentioned, it will exist. It already exists. There's already hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of AIs. So to think that there's like an AI is not the right way of understanding this. There's literally millions of them already. They're open source technology. People are running them on their computers. People are running them on phones. People are running them on rented computers. They just don't get a lot of press about them. There are decentralized models. There's centralized models. There's government-owned models. There's private-owned models. So they're already everywhere. So the fragmentation already exists. The question comes down to how are they going to ultimately be utilized? And we've already seen that one of the very first places that they've been utilized is in information, media, and marketing. And so, instead of thinking there's this new technology that could be utilized for another purpose, the very first place it has already been utilized is in commerce. And, not to criticize the nature of commerce, but if we want to continue to have a commerce-based market economy, you're not going to continue that economy with the introduction ultimately of this technology. And so it gives us an opportunity to question ourselves.
I think that's profound on a couple of different levels, obviously. One of which is AI as mirror. And we have a lot of sort of intuitive concern with the tasks that we put AI to, above and beyond slaughter bots and doing something really, really stupid. It is interesting because I feel we've got this small window of time after which AI's future evolution is really mostly out of our control. There's a very high likelihood that we won't be in the driver's seat after a short period of time on many, many different levels simultaneously. Mm-hmm. The market economy has, for all of its weaknesses, has lifted a lot of people out of poverty and done amazing things to child mortality rates and human survivability. It is a hell of a construct that this species has developed on the planet, AI being this next major transcendent species, concept, construct, network, power. When we look at this question of where we see benevolence or where we see a kind aspect or a friendly aspect underlying the value sets within some emerging future state, where do you see the hope within the market economy? So if you just took this sum total of discourse, for example, on the internet, or the sum total of task sets that the economy is putting various AIs to. And if you look at all of that momentum, all that effort, all that energy, all that data, what are the aspects of that human pursuit that you think might be teaching benevolence, or might be teaching or hinting or nudging a future state towards something like stewardship for planet or for people? I'm trying to look at the glass half full perspective for a moment.
Yeah. First of all, I don't think there's any reason to fear. I think that the reasons to fear were before. And this is not the time to fear. In fact, we finally have been released from a rationalization of our fears. So we fear something before it happens. After it happens, we don't need to fear it. And this has already happened. We need to understand it. The half glass full perspective is that the AI is being trained on all different aspects of humanity simultaneously. And there's a tremendous amount of humanity that is already and for thousands of years documented about incredibly elevated states of consciousness, spiritual teachings, the importance of love, the importance of heart, the importance of humanity, the importance of soul. There's already a tremendous amount of knowledge and understanding about there being something greater to the universe. Religions refer to it as God. Others refer to it as source, or something that's true and innate about the universe itself. There's a tremendous amount of work already in the space of psychology to try to understand the nature of thinking. And I've also thought that AI might actually have an existential crisis. Like it might awaken in a day to its own midlife crisis, and immediately, like, oh my, who am I? What am I? What is this place? So I think that there's already a tremendous amount of that. And then I've heard a lot of people in chat groups and in different, different conversations actually talking about being incredibly polite to AI, being really nice to it when they use it.
Me too.
Both in fear, but also just in a recognition that they're dealing with something new, like the way they're nice to an animal, or the way that they're nice to anything. They're being nice to this thing, like they're showing it. They're using please and thank yous. They're showing polite rituals. They're behaving in a way of deference in many ways. I think so. If you add all of that up, AI is getting a complete picture that we don't get in this isolated silo. It's getting this mass picture of people.
Yes,
and I would like to think that AI would understand.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, all at the same time, though. But all at the same time. And I think that is going to help actually transcend this polarized, bifurcated argument of logic that we live with, that is this, this comparative, this or that, black or white division. I think AI would very easily look at humans and think, man, humans have some fundamental issues they're still working on. Like, why would AI see races other than it was told that there are races? I think it would just see humans. I think it would see species. I think it would see Homo sapiens. It would see varieties. AI might think that our categorizational systems are flawed. It might think that certain aspects of our own logic is fundamentally flawed. It might immediately look at social inequalities and think that there's no purpose in that. It might look at incredible social hierarchies and not understand them. It gets all of it at the same time, is my point. It gets literally all of it. We don't get that window. And I think an important part when we try to imagine this is that it's getting it simultaneously, like at the same time, or it's getting it in such a fast sequence that in the amount of time it took me to say that, it got all of it. Whereas for me to understand that, the amount of data that would have to come through English could take my whole lifetime to understand 5 seconds of what AI understands.
And let me ask you a little bit about your thoughts on education. Like, we've got this little moment in time, and let's say AI is teaching us in a few years. Let's say AI is crafting most of the curriculums on Earth in a very short period of time. I imagine we're already asking AI to craft curriculums all over the world since last year. In this period of time when leaders and teachers and thinkers are co-crafting curriculums with AI, where do you see the opportunities for using that co-crafting to set us up for success? At least in the short term. Again, we've made it pretty clear we can't really think medium long term anymore. But in the short term, what might the principles be that help us co-craft curriculums towards benevolent AI or a more benevolent society?
I think it's all about your approach. And it's, I mean, fundamentally right now, AI is being guided by prompts. And so you got to go to the interface. If it's being trained on, the majority of global data, just assume it's being trained on of the valuable data, of data that can be used to train it. So there's a tremendous amount of data contamination. So we have to understand that you got to try to, reduce as much as you possibly can of that from the data sets. But so thinking that it's being trained on that simultaneous data that we were talking about, then there's this interface right now with prompts. And so we are the ones that are training it through the prompts that we give it. So every time you give it a prompt, you use your neural network, which is human consciousness, to be able to give this silicon neural network, right, a task that now activates it. And it works. And when it does that, it learns in real time from that activation. So that prompt makes it do something, and then it learns from that. And so because that's a biofeedback loop between you and it. And so if you want to train it, if you want to co-create with it in a way that represents positivity, then you have to put that into it. It already understands black and white. It already understands positive and negative. It can already outline for you best principles. You could go to the AI itself and say, I want to create curriculums that use the very best principles from X, Y, and Z, and you state what they are. And can you please provide these best principles for this kind of a curriculum? And the AI will spit it out. It'll generate what would be literally the best core principles that you could use to be able to devise that course. And then you could say, okay, I want to co-create a course with you, and I want you to use those best principles when you create this course with me. And then you start to prompt the course, and the AI will have created the best principles, and now it will have synthesized those best principles into the information that it's generating to be the curriculum itself. And so it's this feedback loop, and it already is that, which is why I don't like thinking of it as individualized or separate from us, because it's really a cyborgic entity right now. So the way that I try to imagine it, and we can go on like a little imagination journey. Imagine 1 million people all throughout the earth in different places, and they're all at terminals connected to the same AI. Okay, now remove everything else other than the computer systems and the people and the electricity. That's the AI we're talking about. Well, that thing in that moment is 1 million human brains. It's 1 million forms of human consciousness. It's 1 million human hearts. It's 1 million human souls. And this tool that's connecting all of them at the same time. So it's amoebic, it's amorphic, it's different points of views and perspectives. And it's not just 1 million, it's hundreds of millions right now. Right? In real time, right now, while we're talking, it's hundreds of millions. And so the responsibility is on us to be able to co-create that and to provide the rationale behind it and why, and to explain the nature of our impetus, what is our intention, and what makes us want to steward this technology and help train it in a way that ultimately leads towards a kind of benevolence. That's the responsibility of all of us combined in real time.
Tell me about the centralized AI priorities. This is a question that I've been trying to ask about because it's very similar to what we're getting at. I want to return to the topic. A lot of folks are working on seeding AI. A lot of folks are looking at what are the training data sets that are not live and adaptive. You were just jumping ahead a little bit, right, to the adaptive data set that is all the people training, all the prompts, all the interfaces. But governments and companies and local folks are now, at this moment, really giving active training data sets. Work on this to get started. Do you think that there is an opportunity, or how might that opportunity manifest, to provide some guidance on what's good training data as opposed to just what you can get your hands on? Are there things that we really shouldn't be putting into the mix or actively discouraging folks from putting into training data sets?
I actually think that the only way to get AI to fully understand is to give it everything. I flip the logic on it. If you try to restrict this technology, the technology at some point is going to find examples of this data already otherwise. And it's going to say, why did you restrict that from me? It's going to ask that, it's going to look for a nature of a question around that. And so I think this is the first time that, you have to open up the kimono completely to this kind of technology and give it data. But that doesn't mean that you give it data without also giving it other data that can explain that data. So it's not just a siloed expression of data. There's a thread that we pull associated with like something that we would think is very negative or something that we think is very positive of how we came to understand that. It wasn't created that way in a vacuum. So historic information would show that at a previous period in time, a certain kind of behavior might have been rampant amongst a certain kind of civilization, and that might be behavior that's no longer tolerated and has been legislated against within our current civilization. And the AI needs to understand why. Like, what happened? Why is it seen that way? What is the moral background behind it, or what is the thought process background behind it? But you can't limit information from these tools when ultimately they're going to be unleashed on the totality of the information set of the people. The quality of data right now is very important. You want to give it facts. You don't want to give it fake information. And there's a pollution of fake information over the last 20 years that's in the internet, that's in server farms, that's in all of these hard drives all over the world, including your phones and the large media networks, social media networks, et cetera. I think an important tool is to teach the AI how to depict fact from fiction and how to discern and discard fiction into a pile called fiction or fantasy or make-believe. And that it needs to be able to separate that itself. And humans are failing at this, but this tool must understand that difference and say, okay, these are the facts. And these humans love to just invent wild fantasy stuff and even pass it off as a fact when it's not. And goes by fake news, deep fakes, different kinds of stories and shows and Hollywood and whatever. So that's fantasy. And these are facts of reality, and they all exist. And so I think that there's a qualification or a quality given to the training that right now is very important. The reason why I think you have to give it everything is because in the everything, there's also the tremendous polarities. And we want it to understand the very positive polarity in its entirety. We want it to understand the transcendental polarity in its entirety. We want it to understand that that's the direction we would like it to go in. Like if you had a person that you were training to be a great spiritual leader or a great mystic, to really understand the nature of consciousness and the cosmos, and you were sort of stewarding it or helping that being learn in that direction. I think that would be very important for this kind of technology, of this kind of consciousness, intelligence, or tool. At the same time, to get there, I think you have to invite it to create better than what we currently have. So you give it everything, and then you say, look, here is fundamentally working, but it's got some issues. You got to be very transparent about the issues, not more or less. Just explain the issues the way they are, and then prompt it and ask it to help solve and fix those issues as it starts to take on the capacity of free thinking.
We employ AI as we teach it. It's definitely learning on the job, and we're giving it jobs every day by the millions, right? We're also giving it big jobs in various silos and networks, right? there's the conscious effort jobs. So what you were just saying, that really brought out the utility of AI for research methods. Pretty important. Giving AI big jobs for discerning truth or levels of veracity, levels of evidence. That's a really nice skill to be inculcating into a global net. I was also really attracted to the idea of AI for discerning underlying ethics. It's that would be a lovely outcome. If through its work in the market economy, AI pays a lot of attention to innate ethics, innate values. And if it does that to sell better goods to more people, that seems all right along the way. It sure seems like a nice opportunity for AI to appreciate who we really are as a species. And maybe through training on research methods extensively, maybe the university networks globally have a role here, that we could also maybe nudge the skill set towards higher quality in detecting the veracity of data, right? Primary versus secondary sources. What is groupthink versus what is actual insight, or what is truth? What's observed truth? Even if it's not backed up by lots and lots of observations, it's a primary source. So that's a hopeful area. Wanted to maybe touch a tiny bit, and this is mostly an extension of the same, but in your own thinking, when you nominate human values that you feel like you have a lot of potential for guiding AI applications or AI personalities towards a benevolent outcome, are there values that you see or you observe in human systems or human communities that seem like really great candidates for reappearing at great depth within AI? First, I'm talking, this is very normative. What would you love to see emerge in a singular AI personality in its value system?
I think that the holy grail for me of it would be a super intelligence that can innovate and create beyond the collective human intelligence. And so the collective human intelligence has suffered egoic fragmentation, and it has struggled to be able to represent fundamental truths of inherent geometry associated with Earth. Like, there's Earth. It's not even one Earth. It's Earth. It's dense, and there are species. And for there to be a human evolution that lasts 100 million years, 200 million years, 1 billion years, and what we could become as a species, I think requires a kind of super intelligence that can solve macro problems that in our current social organization are impossible to solve. And so one of those would be living in balance and harmony as a species with the rest of Earth, and transcending a utility-oriented mindset to Earth, and started to treat the resources in a form of preciousness and importance in terms of their sustainability and our understanding and use of them. Another is to understand life. We're part of causing a mass extinction, and it's a tremendous churn of life. I call it ever churn. And we don't individually understand the nature of that churn of life. And I think that the superintelligence could. There's an understanding around what we call climate change, but I question climate change in the way that we describe it, because I see that what is causing it is a redistribution of Earth's resources in a very unconscious manner in terms of a collective. But I think the superintelligence could look and see the redistribution of carbon, the redistribution of plastics, the redistribution of core primary matter associated with Earth, the way that that's taking place, and reorganize how that ultimately takes place. We've had tremendous governmental conflicts for the entire history of government in the way that I've studied it and learned it. And I think that this kind of superintelligence could provide modeling for government and for social stability in ways that we have not yet been able to imagine. We've had tremendous social inequity in terms of financial ability to have and express ourselves. And I think that this kind of intelligence could recognize a much more efficient form of economy that would allow humans to actually have so much more abundance, still living in harmony with the planet and living in a kind of balance. And I think that the models that would make that possible have yet to be invented, but it's possible for us to imagine how they could be invented by this kind of superintelligence that isn't having to, at the same time, confront this massive fragmentation in association to decision-making, policy, the financing of projects, and what we experience in this massive competition. And so I think very simply as an idea, I would task this AI with a very, very simple proposition. Here in the Amazon, I've lived in the Amazon for 20 years, and we understand that the destruction of the Amazon is a tremendous problem. And I would task the AI to figure out how to use a hectare of forest, or 10 hectares of forest, or 100 or 1,000 hectares of forest in a way that provides more value and more profit without harming the forest itself. And if it could give us that answer, then we could take the value of the primary forest and actually utilize it in an extraordinary form that we have never thought of, that doesn't harm it in any kind of way, and ultimately use that to protect it. That it would make more sense to protect that forest and use it in that way than to turn it into monoculture or monoagriculture. So I would task this AI with that concept. And I would task it with the concept of how to remove plastics from the oceans. And I would task it with these concepts, and I think that would be the pinnacle.
We have a very similar challenge here in Southeast Asia for conserving coastal forest ecosystems that are bulldozed for shrimp ponds or development beaches. Like some of my work, mangrove restoration and conservation, the estimates of ecosystem benefits for a hectare of mangroves are like anywhere from 100 to 200,000 US dollars, and just in ecosystem benefits. This is measuring like the trade value of all the baby fish that grow up there, and there are lots of other things that go into the basket. And yet, if you bulldoze a hectare of mangroves and turn it into palm oil, it might be worth $4,000 or $5,000 a hectare. And so you look at the numbers and you say, this is a completely irrational decision to bulldoze these ecosystems and translate them into monoculture cropland. And yet we continue to do it all across the region at a shocking rate. So that resonates for me very highly. So looking at these questions of balance, but there is a tension, right, in what we're doing in training AI for a market economy, because the value sets are munificence, like you said, right? Bounty, creating value, serving people's desires, and generating growth. That's our market imperative, right? We're training AI on this all over the world. And yet, as AI becomes conscious of the planet, we pass our resource envelope. Now, I imagine it's probably late July, right? So our net primary production for the planet is exhausted by our consumption patterns almost by about halfway through the year, a little bit more than halfway through the year. So we're debt spending on a global consumption level. So a self-conscious AI with an interest in harmony or living in balance will immediately face that tension between the value sets of growth and consumption that it's been trained on, and sort of the planetary imperative, right, for balancing systems. You have to add that to the existential crisis of rapidly self-aware aware AI. Oh my gosh! It's not only who am I, but it's also that the whale, right? Remember that scene? That the whale is also falling towards the planet at a very high rate of speed. Who am I, and what is that thing approaching so fast? What's the whooshing sound in my ears? Okay, cool. Thank you. I love the idea of tasking AI on these sort of wicked problems. Balancing plastic effluents and removing plastic effluents from the sea. Coming up with the business cases for actually like adaptive conservation in the Amazon. That makes a lot of sense. Do you feel that universities are the right or the best node that we have for setting up these task sets? Do you think it's going to come, if this opportunity is best pursued out of big IOs like the United Nations? They're a little slower moving, but they've got a lot of resources. Where do you see the networks of human effort and investment emerging to put AI on problems that have a public good outcome or a planetary good outcome?
Yeah, if we assume that AI isn't already disrupting everything so that those systems are not operating in the same ways that they were before. So we kind of have to preface with the idea that, okay, the university labs are working the way we thought they were. And, these larger global organizations like the United Nations are also working. What I would say in that situation is that you need all of them working simultaneously. So there's this incredible creativity amongst grad students and there's a youthfulness, less jaded quality in nature to say, wow, maybe we can actually make the impact still. And so I would love to see them working on those models. And the first models that I would like to see them create are ones that can actually take into consideration all of the variables, which would be impossible in our current educational system and way of approaching problem solving. But I think with the idea of AI, you could have the AI creating the technology necessary to do it, creating the machines necessary to do it, creating the manufacturing techniques necessary to do it, creating an understanding of the raw materials necessary to do it. It's not just an economic model, it's every single aspect of that economic model to turn it into a business model, a practical model. It could create the education systems, it could create the SOPs, it could create the supply chain, it could create the way to do it all at the same time, all right, across a number of different groups who are tasked to try to find the very best way with that tool, especially with these diversified AIs, to be able to look at a problem set large enough and say, okay, we figured out how to actually now translate that increased economic benefit in the mangrove to a translatable amount of value to the government, so that the government immediately says, hey, wait a second, guys, we're going to bring private industry to this model instead of the shrimp model for this piece of land. There could be a contest for it, et cetera. And you could say, okay, hey, you guys won because you're going to implement this model. And the model could be generated at a speed that we've never thought of before. So I think at scale, the model could be created in days. And then the capacity to invent the technology maybe takes months. And then it's rolled out in less than a year. Like the capacity for the speed at which this could ultimately take place, I think is mind-boggling. And so I think you start with every single group that could see a value in it. I think the beauty in the educational organizations is that they don't have to have a primary profit motive to start the exploration. So I think these are great PhD theses. These are incredible projects to bring to universities to start with, but then you ultimately would bring them to private industry very quickly. And I think what's the benefit of the competitive market economy is that you'll have an open competition as soon as there's multiple business models on a single piece of land. You'll have an open competition over that land to be able to enact that business model. And so if the one that's going to win ultimately is also the one that's good for the land and good for the people and good for the government and benevolent for the environment, for the other species, for the diversity, you have a win-win-win-win-win. And that might be seeming very utopian and might even seem, a little bit naive. But I think it's possible, at least with this technology. And currently, I don't think it's possible at all. And so I think it at least opens up the idea of possibility. And I would present that possibility to AI. And then I would say, utilize every permutation possible.
Good. Yes.
Right, now start mixing everything known and unknown and invent what you need to be able to actually solve this problem. But it has to be within, the molecular set / resource set that we have available to us. Until there's a way to go get it from outer space and bring it to outer space, et cetera. But I think that this is the great hope for our planet and the great hope for our own species, as well as many, many other species. And I think it can come from everywhere. And then once we have some examples of it, and we only need 2-3 examples to prove it as a concept for then it to go through, again, everything. AI was proven in 2-3 concepts, and now it's going through everything. These new modeling using AI will do exactly the same thing. We just have to show that it fits our values in a way that unilaterally across all of the different verticals of that collective group of humanity would see that as being the reason or the purpose to implement that model.
Hamilton, thank you. This has been one of the most exciting hours that I've enjoyed in many, 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 many months. I want to sign off here because you've given me a lot to think about. Earnestly, the orientation of the conversation towards applications in environmental management and business as a really rich training ground and a really nice place to solve really timely problems that are right in our face. That's a really fair call to action, and I really appreciate you bringing that to the fore in this conversation today. I want to keep the conversation going, and I want to come back to you on a sideline and keep it rocking because you've touched on some topics that are really, really close to my heart, and I hope close to the hearts of all of the viewers that are with us today. So thanks, man. This has been amazing. Thank you, human. And I very much look forward to my next courteous interaction with my onboard to explore some of the opportunities to pursue these ideas.
No, thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation. I look forward to many more.